This is the Exo 45 Patriot, and it is not a mech. Or is it? In the game, it's referred to as an exosuit, but a lot of people are still calling it a mech. So what even is a mech? And is everyone actually right to call it one? Today, I'm going to be diving feet first into what a mech is, and what the difference between a mech and an exosuit is, and how did we even get here in the first place? Mechs and mecha are a staple in mainstream media these days, and some would say that it all started with Japanese mecha such as Gundam and Transformers, and having played Armored Core 6 quite recently myself, and even playing it again for this video, it's interesting to see just how different it is to the mechs I'm usually familiar with. Obviously, we don't really have any real-world examples to draw from when it comes to combat mechs. And most of the time we see mechs actually replacing tanks in most universes, which seems like a mistake if you ask me. One of the first games I ever played was MechWarrior 2, and these days the newer games in the Battletech series are definitely still carrying on the same sort of style, doing away with all the quick movement and ninja-like melee attacks of Japanese mecha, and instead showing off battle mechs as the big, lumbering mechanical beast that it really is. But even in the Battletech universe, it seems like mechs are actually a whole different class of vehicles brought in alongside the usual tanks and APCs, but nevertheless they're still piloted vehicles. And while they're definitely a fair amount smaller, the Titans from the Titanfall series are seemingly a blend of both styles, being fast and agile with very human-like movements, but still having the weight and lumbering feel to remind you that it's still a big, heavy mech. And if they're not fighting, they're farming, such as the mechs seen here in Lightyear Frontier, although honestly they kinda remind me of the ones from that one Love, Death and Robots episode. Which, now that I look at them, something does seem oddly familiar. But the thing that all of them seem to have in common is the way they're operated. Regardless of their origin, mechs all seem to be piloted much like you would an aircraft, with a pilot manipulating sticks, buttons, and levers to control the machine. And proportionately at least, the pilot is usually several times smaller than the mech they're in. Even one of the smallest mechs seen in video games, being Diva's mech in Overwatch, she still can be seen controlling it with a pair of high-tech looking flight sticks. But what about exosuits? Well, your typical exosuit is exactly that. A suit. Whether it's Iron Man, a Tenno Warframe, or, if you have a good memory for particularly terrible games, the Javelins from Anthem, the common thread is that it's something you wear. One of the most famous examples of exosuits in games would definitely have to be the suits from the Crysis series, and if you ask me, that's probably the purest form of that idea. It's a suit worn by a person that then augments their abilities, and in that sense you'd be hard-pressed to call it a vehicle, even if he does seem to make vehicles seem obsolete. What I'm getting at here is the difference between an exosuit and a mech is a lot like the difference between wearing sweatpants or driving a car. There is one type of mech, however, that seems to break all of these conventions: Pacific Rim's Jaegers. These towering behemoths rival the battle mechs in overall size, but have a completely unique control setup. The Jaegers have two pilots who wear control suits that look a lot like Iron Man's exosuit, and they seem to control the mech using their entire bodies. And sure, they do actually have some of those buttons and control panels that other mechs have, but the majority of actions such as walking, punching, and even shooting are done by having the pilots mime the movements they need their mech to make. But while this does break the convention of mech controls I mentioned previously, the pilots are obviously still inside a control pod, much like any other mech pilot is. So you couldn't say they're wearing it like a suit, and that puts it firmly in the mech category. So that brings us back to the Patriot. No, not that Patriot, this Patriot. It's a walking machine with an armored torso, a Gatling-style rotary cannon firing what appears to be 20mm or larger rounds, and topped off with a pod loaded with high-explosive unguided rockets. And it's worth noting that those rockets appear to have some sort of shape charge, since the explosion is not particularly particularly big, but it's able to pierce relatively thick armor, like that of the Terminid Heavy Charger. Built by Morganson Arsenal on Tien Quan, the Patriot is a development of the earlier model EXO 44 Stomper, as seen in Helldivers 1. And much like the Stomper, the Patriot is capable of using its sheer size and weight to stomp smaller enemies while being armored and stable enough to even resist the ramming power of a Charger. However, unlike the Stomper, the Patriot is unable to launch stratagem beacons due to it missing the necessary equipment to do so. And so when we get out over and over again to launch stratagem beacons, we might get our first clue as to whether or not the Exos are actually mechs or exosuits. As the Helldiver climbs in and out of the Patriot, we can see that they have to squeeze through a hatch in the rear of the torso. However, as they enter the body of the Patriot, we can see the legs, arms, and even hips of the walker don't really allow for the body of the Helldiver to reach inside, and then they likely wouldn't be manipulating the limbs in such a direct manner. While we can't really see the controls of the Patriot for ourselves, it's very clear that the design of it is catered towards piloting, more so than simply wearing a suit. And given that the suit is roughly twice the size of the Helldiver or more, it's fair to say that this is looking less like the exosuit that Arrowhead seem to be calling it. So why do they do it? Looking at the overall shape of both iterations of the EXO, you can see that both the Stomper and the Patriot are reminiscent of another spacefaring Xenos fighting power suit. And I'm not talking about Space Marines, although the Hulk Devastator and the Dreadnought might need to get on 23andMe and meet their parents, but this one comes from Weyland Yutani, the capitalist space corp from the Alien series, where the power loader, and especially the combat exoskeleton in the Aliens vs. Predator series, bear more than just a passing resemblance. So it's entirely possible then that this could simply be a reference to the workloader and its categorization as an exoskeleton or exosuit. But maybe there's another reference here that I'm missing, and if I am, feel free to let me know down in the comments. But it's also worth pointing out that because the workloader in the Alien series seems to encase the pilot's limbs in a way where their own limb movements directly translate to the movements of the machine, it's fair to say that it is more a true exoskeleton, and that they are technically wearing it instead of simply riding in it. So with those differences in mind, we come to the big question. Which one is it? Is the Exo-45 and its family of walkers a mech or an exosuit? Based on everything we've seen so far, it's fair to say that the operator is more akin to a pilot at the controls than Tony Stark wearing a suit, and so I'm happy to say that it joins the ranks of the Kerenskys and indeed battle mechs in general of being a true mecha, albeit a very, very small one. But it's got a pilot, an engine, controls, and on top of all of it, it's stomping, lumbering, and can crush a bug under its foot. All the things you'd want in a mech. But let me know your thoughts down in the comments and what kind of mechs do us Helldivers really need on the battlefield. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like and of course subscribe if you're brand new to the channel. More Helldivers lore to come. My name is Panzer. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.